right, let's get going with the webinar for March. This is Brandon Paxton. I'm going to run through a quick webinar presentation on the mind-body connection. This is actually a presentation that we gave about a month ago, 2 months ago, actually, in January for the peer support conference down in Salem. My partner in crime here was Jasmine Sutton, who's actually going to be joining us in April, and she's a associate clinical counselor, currently with the Portland Police Bureau as well, but has a ton of experience working with mental health, is now on the counseling side, working through sharing how we can be more resilient, how we can deal with stresses that come with the job, both inside and out, and how it relates to our performance on and off duty. So I wanted to share this presentation. It's like I said, it's two parts. I'm going to cover kind of the physical aspects of it, how sleep, physical movement, and nutrition impact our overall well-being. And then next month, Jasmine's going to be coming on, and we'll talk about stress, anxiety, how the body responds to that, especially over time, given the career field that we're all in. So we'll go ahead and get started with this. We'll post the office hours as well. But there's some good information here. I think some of it's going to be a reminder, but some of it could be new. Always the goal is to leave everybody with just a couple take homes for each of the categories. All right, so today's conversation, we're going to talk about physical movement, the impact to our health and our mental health specifically. Sleep is a foundation of wellness, and then how we fuel the human machine, our body, and the food choices we make and the impacts that has on us daily. So this is a great quote we got from our nutritionist, Carlin Young, and we've seen her a number of times now, but she shared this with me the other day, and she just simply said that a fed brain is a calm brain. And I think that makes a ton of sense, especially as we look into this later about how we fuel our brain and what we have. But if you have fuel in your system, the right types of foods, fueling your brain, you're able to make more rational decisions, and you're not so much worried about what you need in your brain in terms of a fuel, whereas you can just be present and make those decisions, whether they're emergent or non-emergent, based off the situation that's in front of you. So I love that quote from Carlin. She's used that a lot in terms of who, the folks she's worked with who are counseling patients, but how that relates to how her business and how she applies food to that problem and that solution. Okay, so the right food choices. I think a lot of these are known, but it's pretty obvious that when we make the right food choices, they increase energy, they reduce inflammation. So a lot of the foods we have in our standard American diet, or the SAD diet, as Carlin would say, tend to increase inflammation. That's due to the increases in fats and processed foods and sugars, salt that's added to a lot of the foods we eat tend to increase the inflammation. So making the right food choices. And then when we say the right food choices, we'll go on those a little bit later, but really that's about whole nutrient dense foods and trying to avoid processed foods where we can, and then kind of eating within our limits, with our specific goals in mind. As we go through, it's strengthening bones and muscles as we move through our careers. Food choices tend to lower the risk of obesity, heart disease, and certain cancers. And then obviously, if, depending on our goals, but the right whole nutrient dense foods tend to make us feel full longer. So that's the satiety portion of the food conversation. And then it fuels our activity. And this is pretty important, certainly on duty. If you're a responder and you're out on an alarm, having the right fuel in your system, or having access to the right fuel, really can make a difference in the decision quality and the impact you make on scene. And then certainly off duty as well. If you're into, half Ironmans or snowboarding, whatever your activity may be, choosing the right fuels allow you to perform at a higher level for that activity. Okay, so we're going to touch real briefly on the macronutrients. The three that we've covered in previous newsletters that really speak to macronutrients are proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Again, this is general guidelines based off of the macronutrients you'd need, but they vary based off of your goals, the activity level, and your age, size of your body. But generally speaking, the proteins for general fitness, we're wanting to get 10 to 15% of the calories we consume from proteins. The general fitness level for fats is 25 to 35%, and carbohydrates at that general fitness level is 45 to 55%. So these are general guidelines, but you can kind of look through here and say, hey, here's what my goals are. I'm performing at a medium to high intensity. I need to look at the carbs that I need to be consuming. Generally speaking, you can look at around 55 to 65% of your calories need to be coming from carbohydrates. So proteins, what do they do? And this is through previous conversations with Carlin and topics we've covered in the newsletter, but proteins are vital to healing muscle. They're healing your body and tissue repair. So if you've had exerted yourself through a workout or alarm response or whatever that might be is restoring your body through good protein choices. So, they're essential for strength during physical challenges, but also most importantly is rebuilding that muscle after those challenges. So when you look to get the right amount of proteins, it's a balance of animal and plant sources. So really looking to identify the animal sources through lean meats and then the plant sources to get a good balance. So things like eggs and beans and tofu, things like that. Fats are the most energy dense macronutrient. So that provides essentially a slow burn fuel. So carbohydrates will be much quicker in terms of the release and the burn, but the fats provide a longer duration, slow burning energy. So they're good for long efforts. So if you're storing fat, if you're going to exert yourself during a long effort, this is where that fat macronutrient comes into play. And it really, again, the satiety piece comes back here and helps us feel full longer, and it helps to regulate glucose levels and reducing spikes and inflammation as a result. Okay, so carbohydrates, forever they've kind of had a mixed bag in terms of are they needed, are they not, but they're really important to how our brain functions. As we were going through this presentation, we did, some research that I came across was our brain alone utilizes 60% of our body's available energy from carbs. So our brain is very active. It's very dependent upon the energy we put into it. And so making sure we have the right fuel types, in this case, it's carbs and sugars that fuel that brain, allow us to make really good decisions, timely decisions. If we're short on that fuel, if we're depriving our body from those fuels, our brain has a hard time processing, right? It's looking to search for food instead of making decisions, right, in a clear and distinct way. So allowing our body to take in those carbs to meet our brain's demands. But I thought that was really an interesting piece of information, how much energy our brain utilizes on a day-to-day. And then again, carbs are the most efficient and abundant fuel source that's available to us, easily consumed, but really vital to how we perform. So when we talk about whole nutrient dense foods, what do they do for us versus processed foods? We're looking at this head of broccoli here. It's rich in essential nutrients. It's high in fiber. It improves our ability to feel full through that increased satiety and digestive health through increased fiber. If you're to kind of compare that to processed foods where we have an increase in fat, an increase in salt and sugar, all those tend to be somewhat inflammatory and they end up being really calorie dense. So if you're going to eat a donut, you may end up with an excessive amount of calories, whereas a whole more nutrient dense food like something like a piece of broccoli or a carrot, while it may not taste as good, it's going to provide a ton more value in terms of its nutritional ability versus a donut. And it's not to say that the donuts should never be eaten. There's a time and a place, but it's generally speaking, moderation is the key here. So this is one of the questions that I had for Carl, and I typically do is how do you balance a plate? And we've covered this previously, but this is a good resource. It's myplate.gov. If you click on the QR code, it'll take you right there. But it kind of gives some good ideas and recipes around how you should, or maybe how you would consider organizing your plate if you're going to sit down and feed, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, what that may look like. But there's some really good options and resources within this site here to take a look on how you can balance proteins, fats, and carbs to achieve your goals, with the sort of end goal being balance. Okay. So the second component we'll cover today is the sleep portion. And this is one I think that's really foundational. And I think for me, I intuitively knew it, but I didn't know some of these sort of details. And a lot of this came from conversations with Dr. Dan Root, who some of you may have seen, previous webinars. But one of his quotes when we first started talking was that chronic sleep deprivation leads to poor decision-making, psychomotor disruptions, and can interrupt relationships. And I thought that was just a really powerful quote when he was talking about how important sleep is to our day to day, but its impact on mental health as well, and how it can relate, how it can interrupt relationships and causes those disruptions in our ability to perform tasks. So when we think about our roles as firefighters and what we do on a day-to-day basis being sleep deprived, this is really important to recognize like, hey, this is a component of what we do, but we need to find ways to balance that. So we'll kind of talk about some best practices towards the end of this section, but thought this was a really powerful quote that Dr. Root explained. Just a couple of stats here as we go with the sleep topic, but 50 to 70 million Americans have chronic or ongoing sleep disorders. That's a really large number. And then 40% of firefighters have some form of sleep disorder, and a third of police officers have obstructive sleep apnea. And when I talked with Dr. Root, obstructive sleep apnea was the number one cause that folks came in to get diagnosed and addressed. And then when I asked him more about the firefighters and how they're impacted, why there tends to be more, a large portion of it tends to be gender-based. There's obstructive sleep apnea tends to impact men greater than females. So just by the nature of more men in the fire service than females, we tend to see higher numbers. But it's still an overwhelming disorder that a lot of our colleagues would perhaps deal with. So this was from Dr. Root. This is just a quick questionnaire. So if you have noticed in yourself or your partner's called it out in you, maybe you've got loud snoring, high blood pressure, mood changes, you're waking during the night gasping, you might have obstructive sleep apnea. So here's a quick survey to take a look through and go through those questions. You can see the high, intermediate, and low risk in the lower left there. But this is just a quick way. There are lots of different sleep disorders that impact all of us. But this is, far and away the highest number from Dr. Root's office. So this was just a resource you can access and share to see if you are at risk for this. And again, if you do have the risk for obstructive sleep apnea, you can go and get a sleep study done. You can do it in one of two ways with Dr. Root's office. They do them actually at home. So if you do have this, a lot of times they feel really confident they can diagnose this through an in-home sleep survey. So this is more than likely a review. Just if we've all been up all night and we know how we feel when we don't sleep, but really what does the impacts or the lack of sleep look like, right? Fatigue or lack of energy, mood swings. I know I feel those when I don't sleep well. Hypertension can be a direct result of poor sleep, hormone imbalancing, decreased emotional control, which goes back to the original quote that Dr. Root shared, and then the impaired decision-making capacity over time. So what are the takeaways here when we're talking about protecting sleep? One of the most important things that Dr. Root shared was the sleep schedule. So maintaining a consistent sleep cycle, so bedtime and wake up times. And, when we initially had the conversation, this was almost laughable given the line of work of first response and firefighters. But he said, hey, as best you can, especially when you're off duty, work to go to bed at the same time and work to get up at the same time. You can control your sleep environment. And so the best case scenario is to have a cool, dark, and quiet place, and then avoiding stimulation. So no screens 2 hours before you're sleeping, avoiding intense exercise. And that was something I kind of got in the trap of, is working out late, and then you'd have a hard time falling asleep. And then reducing or stopping caffeine 6 hours before your bedtime. Caffeine tends to have a longer half-life, so it lives in your system for quite a while. So really reducing when you consume your caffeine if you're trying to protect your sleep. And then napping, if you get off duty having had a long night, napping's reasonable. That Dr. Root shared, he just wants to make sure that those naps are well away from your normal sleep time, so it doesn't sort of refill your tank partly before you would get a full night's rest. And then alcohol, one of his direct quotes was, nothing good happens with alcohol and sleep. So his suggestion is to, reduce or eliminate, but then stop or reduce 2 to 3 hours before bed as you go to protect that sleep. So just a few quick takeaways there. But all this kind of comes together, and we'll talk about this next month. And when we look at long-term stress and how that manifests in our bodies and how that presents, a lot of how we can help control that and reducing the stress and the impacts to our body is through managing our sleep as a foundation of wellness. Okay, so on to exercise and physical movement, wildly important to the work we do, and then just being generally well. But I thought this was a good quote, that those who do not find time for exercise now will be forced to find time for illness later. So I think this is controlling our own destiny here and controlling what we can. And if we can pour into exercise or physical movement, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the gym lifting weights, because I know there's people out there that don't like that. There are ways to just establish a routine and a habit of physical movement that does not necessarily incorporate that. So this is the partial list of the benefits of exercise. I think it's probably more exhaustive than even this, but here were kind of a few of the takeaways. And I think in the context and the conversation around mental health and mind-body connection, reducing anxiety and depression was one of those things that I was interested in learning more about around how physical movement does that. And really, physical movement exercises, that's our ability to release a lot of those stress hormones that we come up against. Cortisol is one of the ones that we hear a lot about. So when we look to reduce stress or reduce that cortisol buildup on our body, physical movement and exercise is one of those things that impacts that greatly. And so taking the time to incorporate that into your weekly routines is going to be really important towards improving not only your physical health, but mental health as well. And then the release of endorphins, that's the feel-good hormone. So lots of research out there that says that post-workout, you get this release of endorphins. Those are feel-good hormones that make you just feel great for an extended period of time as a direct result of physical movement and exercise. But from a firefighter perspective and being healthy on the job, it improves bone density, increases your resting metabolic rate. So when we transform our body composition to have more lean muscle and less visceral fat or fat just throughout our body, we tend to burn more calories at rest because our body is requiring more, having more lean muscle. And then just enhancing our quality of sleep. This was another one of those key indicators that Dr. Root shared was, if you're not working out, you're not expending that energy reserve. And so when you do exercise or you do increase your physical movement, it enhances your sleep quality just by incorporating some of these practices into your week. Another quote I thought was interesting after just kind of reading through the book Dopamine Nation, but exercise has a more profound and sustained positive effect on mood, anxiety, cognition, energy, and sleep than any pills this doctor could prescribe. So pretty compelling quote there. And I think that's true as you kind of just think through all the components of total wellness, but exercise has that impact, and it touches on that list I just shared in a lot of different categories. But I'm really excited to have the conversation next month with Jasmine to kind of revisit some of these topics. But exercise definitely has a profound impact on our overall health, but specifically mental health as well. So what are the general guidelines for physical movement? The CDC says that our general guidelines are 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity aerobic activity, and then a minimum of twice weekly muscle strengthening. So, the moderate intensity aerobic activity, a lot of times that's, raking leaves or mowing the lawn. It doesn't necessarily have to be grinding it out on the treadmill or, in a spinning class or whatever that is for you. It's finding ways to be active in a moderate intensity way. So we keep that in mind as you kind of go to plan out your week. What does that look like? If you're low on this number, maybe you might actually be closer than you think based off some of your current activities you're doing. If you're out there hiking, 1 or 2 days a week, you're more than likely pretty close to that level. So don't limit yourself by thinking, hey, I don't get in the gym, I'm not there. It may not be true. So just look to see what other activities you might be doing that meet this, because you very well could be on your way. And then the minimum of twice weekly muscle strengthening. Again, the benefit there is increased bone density, replacing body composition and making lean muscle the overwhelming component within your body, and increasing your metabolic rate as a result. So that's kind of the minimum standard. It's an interesting stat here at the bottom that 24% of adults are actually meeting this minimum guideline. And that's on a national average. This is not specific to firefighters, but on a national average, about 24% of folks are actually meeting the intended guideline. So exercise, I read an article the other day that called it the miracle drug. And in that context, it was basically sharing that when done correctly, has few or no negative side effects. So, of course, with exercise, there's the risk of injury, but when you're using proper form and working within your abilities, the risk really becomes negligible. Every dose of physical movement or exercise is effective. So if you have 10 minutes where you can focus on mobility, or you're going to get out and walk the dog, all of that matters, and it all goes towards your weekly totals, and it all just goes towards to making you feel just generally better. And it's a free drug essentially. I mean, there's nothing that, if you wanted to get out and hike trails, that's a free thing that you can do. You don't have to be spending the money to be accessing a gym, or feel like you have to pay the big membership fees to be a part of that and be healthy and exercising. So that's what I really like about this specific article is just sharing, hey, it's beneficial at its lowest dose, but the fact that it's free is something to highlight. So again, physical movement, it doesn't have to be what we traditionally think of as being in the gym, grinding it out on a treadmill. Walking has amazing impacts, and we'll get into that in future episodes. But what walking does for us, just being in nature, and how many steps a day you can to get to reduce fat and just improve overall wellness is pretty incredible. But however you look at this, whether you're doing endurance training, strength training, functional movements, and mobility, it just has the ability to make some really good lasting impacts for you. So when we're out there establishing the routine, we are goal driven mostly, right? And so when we're looking to establish those goals, think of the SMART goals. This is something we're probably all familiar with, but this is just a good reminder. We want to make sure they're specific. So you're wanting to narrow your focus, and making sure whatever you're focused on is achievable. And that's the A component of this, but measurable too. How far, how fast, how many days per week can you give this topic? And then do you have the ability and time and the resources? For me, a goal would be climbing Mount Everest. It's likely that's never going to happen. So that's not really a SMART goal for me. But then going down to the next level, is it relevant? Does the goal align with your values? Do you actually believe in you achieving this goal? Because that's really important. And then the last one is time bound. So you want to set an end date. So whatever that goal is, if you're looking to achieve improved fitness, set a 12-week goal, right? And then you can set micro goals within that, but your overall goal, whatever that is, at the end of 12 weeks, you should be able to essentially put a bow on this and then work towards achieving your next goal. And then establishing the system, I think, as you go through physical movement goals, leading with consistency, allowing the results to follow are sort of the format that I've always used when working with folks. But that goes back to establishing the system that's going to get you moving, but then keep you moving throughout this. And regardless of where you're at, whether you're a high performing athlete who's achieved a lot athletically in your life and you're wanting to establish another goal, or you're just getting started out, the systems and the consistency, the plan still holds true. So really it's developing your plan, not getting overwhelmed with too much information. There's a ton of information out there online around what's helpful and what's not. Some of it's good and some of it's bad information. But don't get overwhelmed by that. Set your goal, but then you have people out there who can help you. Oftentimes it's the folks that's sitting at the table with you. We're certainly a resource to you as well if you need help setting up programs or plans, or you have questions about how to get started. But identifying the obstacles that are going to be in your way, whether that's a time constraint with family obligations or kids' schedules, your physical injuries or your limitations there, like what obstacles do you see that could be in your way, and kind of work through the plans that could, if you are up against an obstacle and that's going to be a thing for you, what are your plans to work around that? And then where will you personally sabotage the plan? If you think you're going to get up at 5 a.m. every day to wake up, but you never have done that, it may be something there you're going to hit the snooze and you're going to just skip workouts as a result. So where are you going to sabotage that plan? And again, it goes back up to identifying the obstacles. What's the workaround so you won't do that? And then this is a mindset thing, is visualizing the success. Sort of thinking of yourself as that performer, or visualizing yourself crossing that finish line, or visualizing yourself at a new body composition, whatever that happens to be. It's visualizing and using that mindset to achieve it. Really important as we set out goals and we look to build on the successes we've had. Mindset is key. And then this is a fun little hack I picked up at a conference not long ago, is setting your next goal when you're 80% through your first. So before your goal ends, taking the time to say, all right, what's next? What's my next goal? Whether that's the next 10K or the next half marathon, or I'm going to increase my bench press by 10%, whatever that happens to be, setting the next goal 80% through the first is kind of a cool and fun little hack to keep moving there. The goal here is to not achieve a goal and then fall backwards. It's to have that sort of continuous improvement each and every day. So that's going to be the presentation for this month. I'm really excited for Jasmine to come on. She'll be with us in April and talking about and kind of putting the pieces together here based off this sort of brief primer, how the mind-body connection works and how we see, stress and anxiety manifest in our body and how we feel that, our brain processes some of that information, and then what our body feels as a result. So a lot of times those get isolated and confused. It's a brain thing versus a body thing. More often than not, it seems like they're sort of intertwined. So that's going to be the follow-up. That'll be the part 2 to this conversation. So we'll be looking forward to that in April. For the time being, here's a number of resources to access, regardless of where you're at or needing help with. Jasmine's from It's Just Therapy, so the website is right there. And then Carlin, our nutritionist, she's got some great information as well, has been a guest a number of times. So there's resources out here that are available to you. We are a resource to you too. So if you have questions around any of these topics we covered today, or there's additionals that we can put you in touch with, let us know. You know where to get a hold of us. But other than that, we'll post the office hours in the newsletter, and feel free to reach out at any point. Happy to have a conversation or a text message conversation to get questions answered and on the right track. So looking forward to seeing you all soon. And until then, have a great day. Thanks.